Tokyo, 9 March 1945, 22:45, Honjo Ward on the Sumida. The wind comes off the water with a faint sweetness that does not belong to a city, carrying rumour of blossoms and a promise of trouble. Fire Sergeant Sato Ichiro runs his palm along a bamboo ladder and feels the fibres rasp like a tired violin string. He has made the rounds: sand barrels, bucket lines, canvas hoses coiled in figure eights, and writes the same note he has written every dry night that winter: roofs dry, wind rising. Shitamachi does not sleep so much as idle between shifts. In the alley behind his station, an elderly couple trims gasket cork for a subcontractor who will never see their faces. Up a narrow stair in a candy shop, a girl winds copper wire into ignition coils for a machine she cannot name. The city hides an arsenal in plain sight. Cottage workshops nested inside wooden homes, an industrial fuel load disguised as family life. On the ward map, Honjo looks like order: straight lanes, named canals, tidy squares. On the eaves, reality chews through plan. Tiles are thin ceramic over cedar battens. Tatami layers rooms like tinder, sliding shoji drink sparks and give them back as breath. A coal smell lies over everything, part winter, part habit. He thinks of the way a little fire runs along rafters when the wind finds it, how an ember disappears beneath a tile and the roof exhales flame all at once. He could recite the drill in his sleep: bucket lines to the lane mouth, roof teams with hooks, keep calm and cut fire breaks in time. A siren begins as if inhaling. Somewhere south, it remembers how to scream. Sato pulls his gloves tight and tells his driver to keep the engine warm but not waste fuel. The phrase has been used so often it has lost meaning. Every gallon matters. Every minute means someone's roof. The sound above the clouds grows louder, then fainter, then multiplies into a texture like hail on tin. He follows it with his eyes and finds nothing, only the sheet metal moon and a black ribbon where the Sumida slides past the pilings. At 23:45, the ward chief arrives with a clipboard damp in his fist. Asakusa reports sparks to the south. Honjo is to prepare roof watches and maintain discipline. Maintain discipline is a marble in the mouth, a manual trying to be a prayer. Sato salutes as if on parade and feels foolish, then grateful for the habit of respect. He has his men tie sleeves tight, keep ladders ready, breathe through wet cloth if smoke comes fast. A boy laughs once and stops, as if sound itself were contraband. He walks to the river. The wind lifts the fringe of his scarf and brings the smell of oil from the docks. It is a workingman's wind, good for drying nets and bad for roofs. From the east comes the faintest metallic clinking, as of something opening high above and far away. He tells himself it is a barge chain. He tells himself the chimes will not ring 3, the signal that means move. A single bomber passes unseen, but the timbre of it curls the hair on his neck. It seems lower than any raid he remembers, as if the night has stooped to whisper. He thinks of the ward map again, with its careful searchlight arcs and high-altitude assumptions, and feels a private doubt nibble at the edge of training. Somewhere men in uniforms study dials and speak in clipped phrases. Somewhere other men draw lines on a larger map and measure a city in minutes. At 0008, the watchman's bell finds 3 beats. Ladders rise like spears along the lane. Sato climbs the first rungs and looks south. 2 lines of fire cross the city, straight, deliberate, an X gouged out of darkness. Men on roofs freeze with buckets in hand. A breath of heat comes like a door opening to a furnace room. The night changes shape. Sato does not speak. He watches the X brighten and spread as if the city has been scored and a match run down its seams. Inside the X, he says at last, not knowing how he knows the phrase, only that the fire has drawn its own target. Engines thicken overhead and fall into a rhythm. The first ash touches his cheek and melts there as the wind veers harder from the southeast, lifting sparks ahead of any single blaze. Dugway Proving Ground, Utah, months earlier, though the memory will walk beside the Tokyo night. Evelyn Parker steps into a test house built to Japanese dimensions and pauses at the threshold as one pauses at a shrine. Charred tatami curl like dried seaweed, cedar beams glow with a nicotine sheen where flame licked and withdrew. She measures scorch height with a folding rule and dictates to a clerk who smells of graphite and oil. Gelled gasoline penetration optimal at eave seam. Recommend M69 time delay to ignite interior volume. Cluster opening altitude, 2,000 feet above ground for best dispersion. The Japanese village is both theatre and laboratory, a street of wooden homes raised in the American desert so the United States can learn the grammar of fire. Out on the range, a crane hoists a crate stamped E46. When the latch trips, 38 bomblets tumble and snap their fins like little steel seedlings. On the bench, Parker slices an M69 open and points to the dense slug of napalm. This will slither along joists, cling to tatami, crawl under a tile seam, and spray the room with flame after a delay you can set like a clock. She is an ordnance engineer, quiet and exacting, but even she feels the strangeness of perfecting a recipe for heat as if she were tuning a violin. Doctrine drives the metronome. Reports from the Marianas say the high jet stream shreds precision, and radar can walk a bomber to a city better than a bomb site can point at a single roof. The solution is as radical as it is simple. Strip turrets from the B-29, leave the tail guns, fly at 5,000 to 8,000 feet at night, and trade armour for incendiary payload. The 20th Air Force, under Hap Arnold, has given Curtis LeMay the brief. The 21st Bomber Command will execute with the cold, dull competence of a factory line. Parker revises her tables. An average B-29 will carry roughly 40 E-46 clusters, about 1,520 M69s, plus some M47 oil gel bombs for pathfinders to scrawl a flaming X. Bursting at 2,000 feet spreads bomblets, so each wooden block receives interior ignition points instead of rooftop sparks that can be kicked aside. She watches film, a house dark as a well, a thump, a bright worm of incendiary squeezes through a seam and then blooms. She writes again that the delay must allow the gel to settle before the room inhales flame. Weeks later, she boards a transport and ends up on Saipan in a tent that smells of canvas and damp ink. The flight line is an atlas of abundance, pallets of E-46 clinking like metal fruit, stacks of spark plugs gleaming in wooden frames, tanker trucks idling in a row that seems to touch the horizon. Crew chiefs talk through checklists with the calm of machinists. An operations officer asks her to brief cluster behaviour in humid air. She speaks numbers and angles, avoids adjectives, and watches the faces of men who will carry arithmetic into weather. On the night of 9th March, she steps outside and sees a flat glow on the northern horizon where no city exists. The glow lifts, dims, lifts again, as if a giant bellows were being worked. She thinks of the test house and of the graph she drew to show how a wood and paper room becomes a lantern from the inside. She also thinks of a line she never wrote down. The purpose of a weapon is to make a plan come true. She folds her hands and listens to distant engines beat time across water. Tinian, 9th of March 1945, late evening. Captain Jack Kansas Malloy walks under a B-29 that breathes oil like a living animal. Safety wire tails glitter along the belly. Boot prints fan out from the bomb bays in a grammar of labour. The flight line looks less like an airfield than a continent of crates. Spark plugs in honeycomb frames, replacement R3350 cylinders in Cosmoline, pallets of E-46 clusters stacked so high they cast square shadows. A forklift noses past a truck full of bread, and someone on the loading crew pockets a chocolate bar and waves the rest away. Abundance has its own manners. The briefing tent smells of chalk dust and coffee. LeMay's order is the whole sermon. Night, low, incendiary. Radar to the initial point. Pathfinders will draw an X, guns stripped except the tail. The bet is brutal and clean. By carrying more fire and flying under the jet stream, losses will decline while results increase. The 3 very heavy bombardment wings, 73rd on Saipan, 313 on Tinian, 314 on Guam, will put up roughly 325 superfortresses. About 279 will find and bomb Tokyo. Malloy repeats the numbers to his navigator, who traces a fingertip along a grease pencil route toward the Sumida River. The R3350S cough, catch and settle into a chest-deep purr. In the bomb bay, the loadmaster pats a canister as one pats a dog and reads off stencils. E46, 38 each, 40 clusters. M47s forward for the Pathfinder ships. A crew chief leans in and says he'll miss the side turrets, and the tail gunner replies that he won't miss the extra weight. There is pride in the gamble, but it sits quietly beside calculation. The B-29 can carry up to 20,000 pounds of bombs. Its pressurization and range were designed for daylight precision. Tonight it will be a lantern maker. Malloy climbs into his seat and watches the runway lights smear. He thinks of Kansas wheat bending before a storm and of a statistic that still sounds impossible even to him. The B-29 program cost on the order of $3 to $3.7 billion 1940s dollars, more than the Manhattan Project, and America still built roughly 3,970 of them, while producing about 96,000 aircraft of all types in 1944 alone. Numbers like that feel like weather systems, and he is flying inside one. The tower clears them. The ship rolls, lifts, and takes the Pacific into its wings. Over open water, the crew settles into practiced silence. The navigator calls tiny course corrections without looking up. The radio operator logs Pathfinder reports like a bookkeeper. The tail gunner peers into darkness not for glory, but for obligation. Somewhere far ahead, Parker's tables will meet Sato's ladders, and a doctrine will meet a neighborhood. Malloy thumbs the interphone and says what every aircraft commander says when the coastline is hours away. Steady as she goes. In the dark, fuel flows and minutes tick. The men become small gears inside an engine the size of a nation. The Sumida appears first as a black braid on the radar scope, then as a smell in the cockpit, smoke, wet iron, something sweet going wrong. The Pathfinders are already there, scrawling a flaming X across Asakusa and Honjo with strings of M47 oil gel bombs that stick and bloom along avenues and factory roofs. From the ground, the mark looks like a wound. From Malloy's altitude, it looks like a promise kept. The crew slides down to 6,000 feet under the worst of the wind. The navigator calls headings as if tapping a metronome. Mark is good, the radio man reads. Bomb inside the X. The arithmetic of the plan expresses itself in minutes. Not miles, not hours, minutes. A stream of superfortresses arrives not as a block but as a tide, each wave separated just enough that fires have time to breathe, not enough that firefighters can organize. Sato, on the ladder of a low roof, sees the mark with the clarity of shock. Light rolls along the lane like water poured on stone. He signals his men toward the eastern blocks, but the whistle codes tangle and vanish in the first gusts of heat. The ward map on its wall is already a relic. The city has become a new geometry in which streets are lines of draft and alleys are chimneys. Malloy calls the run. The bomb bay doors ratchet open. A smell of hot oil and something chemical rises like a genie, and the first E-46 clusters slide into the slipstream. They crack open at about 2,000 feet, releasing 38 M69s each. Thick-tailed bomblets tumble and straighten and find gravity with a predator's patience. On the ground, people look up, habit, and then inward because the fire is not falling on roofs but dropping into rooms. Sato hears a sound like nails poured into a bucket. A house 2 doors down seems to inhale and then becomes a lantern lit from within, light forcing itself out through paper and slat. The lane brightens, dims, brightens again as the wave timing works like a forge bellows. In the AA command post, instruments say bombers should be higher. Searchlights chase a sky the enemy is no longer using. A young lieutenant shouts bearings that lead nowhere and watches the light widen with no line to place a gun along. On the river, sparks meet the wind and march. Malloy keeps the ship steady through the first hard fist of updraft, corrects as if he were riding a gust across a prairie field, and hears the tail gunner quietly say he can see the city's glow on the wing. The bombardier calls salvo. The bomber lifts as weight departs. For a heartbeat there is silence, and then the night answers in tongues. An M69 punches through a paper gable and clatters across a tatami mat. There is a pause that feels like a held breath. Then the bomblet spits flaming gel along the floor, up the wall and into the ceiling lattice with a deliberate, almost curious grace. Interior ignition defeats every roof watcher Sato has trained. Buckets wait in the wrong place. Hooks find the wrong angle. The fire starts where hands cannot reach without stepping into it. The wind seizes the room and shakes it until the door frame throws light like a signal flag. Along the block, dozens of identical moments occur at once. Each E46 cluster has scattered 38 such seeds. Each B29 has dropped roughly 40 clusters. Each stream wave arrives on the heel of the last, so that small fires cannot be isolated before they learn how to speak to one another. In a minute, speech becomes chant. In 5, chant becomes weather. Sato swings a ladder to a second roof and feels it vibrate under his boots. Hydrant pressure falters, the pump coughs. Paper masks turn to paste against faces. A roof hook comes away in his hands as if the house has shed its skin. He shouts for his men to pull families toward the river and not to argue with doors that open only onto light. Down the lane, a child's shoes by a threshold curl like leaves on a brazier. Across the water, sparks sail and find new roofs faster than men can name them. In the command post, the telephone board goes dark by islands. The 1st Anti-Aircraft Division tries to move guns along a defence drawn for daylight height and steel, not midnight and napalm. Sato's driver, sweating through his tunic, grinds the engine forward one house length at a time and keeps it from stalling by will. They angle the nozzle against a doorway and feel the stream vanish in a hiss before the water touches anything that remembers being wood. Above, a B-29 rides an elevator of hot air. The tail gunner watches a sheet of roofing tin rise like a playing card pitched by a giant. Someone on the crew crosses himself. Someone else keeps writing numbers in a log because that is how order is maintained. The wind stiffens out of the southeast and gathers the scattered voices of fire into a choir. Doors implode, windows breathe out, stairwells turn into chimneys. Sato hears his own whistle through the cloth at his mouth and does not recognize the note. He knows, as professionals know, that the line has been passed where fighting a fire becomes standing near one. He turns his men toward the river. On the steps, a woman cradles a sewing machine, though her hands are blistering. He takes it from her and sets it down, because saving her is the only salvage in the street. The night tastes of salt and iron. The city becomes a single instrument, playing one pitch. Lieutenant Nakajima Hiro pushes his throttle forward and flies into a sky turned copper by a city-sized torch. The horizon is gone. There is only heat, tracer, and a smear of orange where streets used to end. His radio coughs bearings that do not hold. Low, multiple, can't fix them, a controller says, and then the voice drops away as if swallowed. Searchlights pour at a height the enemy has abandoned. The defensive geometry, radar to light to gun to fighter, expects box formations at daylight altitudes. Tonight the bombers swim under the web and break it with their wake. Nakajima banks toward a shadow and finds it is a column of sparks. Updrafts flip his needles. He steadies the machine by force of habit and dignity. He is good. He is also out of tools. Below him, a lane convects like a forge. Embers leap canals, as if remembering they were once wood on that side too. He sees a roof collapse with the soft, defeated motion of a tent giving up to wind. He imagines for a moment the opposite view, an American cockpit where instruments are crisp, oxygen is sure, and a radar scope draws a river like a black braid. He thinks of the fuel bowser that did not come, and the handful of flyable night fighters at his dispersal, of shared gloves and borrowed parts. A burst of AA walks past nothing and stops. He levels. The air itself feels threaded. Above, Malloy rides through an invisible elevator that grabs the B-29 by the belly and lifts it a dozen yards. He corrects, as if crossing a prairie gust. The bombardier calls the last stick away. The bomber lightens. The crew breathes. Somewhere aft, the tailgunner thinks he sees a fighter and then sees only glare, a smear of light that hides everything except itself. Nakajima chases a rumour and finds a wall. He hears his own breath claw at the mask and smells hot paint. On the ground, Sato reaches the Sumida and stares at water hot enough to hiss against skin. People step in and do not return. The pump falls silent. The ash falls thicker, fine as flour. Impossible arithmetic begins to assemble itself in the night. By dawn, it will likely be true that roughly 279 B-29s have sown on the order of 400,000 M69 bomblets into the Shitamachi rectangle in under 3 hours, more incendiaries in a single operation than many nations could make in months, and that something like 15.8 square miles will have burned to the pilings while about 14 American bombers failed to return. Nakajima levels once more and sees nothing he can change. He banks for base because living to fly again is the only instrument left that registers. Malloy turns his ship toward the ocean and watches the glow recede like a furnace door closing. Sato wipes ash from his goggles and calls names he can still hear through the cloth. The night that was supposed to be a raid has become weather, and men on both sides ride it as far as their training and their luck will carry them. The first great breath comes from the east and turns the lane into a mouth. Sato Ichiro would later say the sound changed from crackle to a steady intake, as if the city had decided to live on flame for a while. Doors implode in polite little bows, then vanish. In the alley where he has practiced drills for years, a current forms and tightens, and what had been many small fires becomes one moving creature that eats oxygen in gulps. He hears the pump labour and smells boiled paint, boiled rice, boiled leather, a market day of things becoming smoke together. He makes a choice he has been trained to make only on paper. Abandon suppression, pivot to evacuation, move people, don't argue with a door that glows at the seams. His men break ranks without breaking. Training holds even when tactics fail. He keeps them close to walls that still remember shade, guides them toward the Sumida by memory because street names have been replaced by temperatures. The ash is different now, finer, almost silky, lifting off roofs in long veils that drift and then drop as if too tired to continue. Above, Malloy holds the B-29 at roughly 6,000 feet and rides invisible stairs. Updrafts shoved by 100,000 interior ignitions punch the ship and let go. The altimeter flutters like a sparrow trapped in glass. He keeps both hands steady and corrects by ounces, not inches, because overcorrection is how you startle a big machine into mistakes. The tail gunner calls a sheet of tin passing by like a giant's playing card. The bombardier has already closed the doors and locked the checklist with a pencil stroke that feels like a benediction. They are light now, and the airplane shows it, skimming the hot breath of the city with the weight of a promise kept. The radio man catches a fragment, results exceptional, that will become the morning's chalk on a board. On the riverbank, the air moves wrong. People crowd toward water that hisses against skin. Those who step down too fast retreat with palms bright red, or do not come up at all. Sato stations men at the quay to steady ladders and to speak calmly, because calm travels farther than orders. The city's own materials conspire against it. Cedar beams exhale saptang, tatami spit flame along their reeds, paper screens turn orange like late fruit and then burst, a silence followed by a roar. Wind from the southeast, steady and implacable, learns the grid and teaches the fire how to march. Somewhere a roof load of seasoned lumber, set aside for a winter project, donates itself to speed. In a command post deeper in the wards, a clerk moves pins across a map already obsolete. High-altitude belts sit like museum pieces while the fight takes place under them. The 1st Anti-Aircraft Division would have preferred a morning raid at predictable heights. What it receives is an arithmetic of minutes and low streams that refuse to resolve into a line a gun can lead. A searchlight finds smoke and loses it. A battery commander orders a salvo and hears only echoes. The telephone board fails by neighbourhoods and then by habit. Messages go out with runners who never arrive. In the air, Lieutenant Nakajima feels his machine buck as if offended by the air itself. A board instrument slaps its stop, returns, slaps again. The fire develops structure. Veterans of cities know when flames have become their own weather, and Sato recognizes the signature. Wind flowing toward heat, heat pulling wind behind it, a conversation that excludes people. He keeps his whistle for intervals because constant blowing suggests panic. He uses his hands, flat, open, deliberate, to move families past each other without entangling, to keep men from trying to save what cannot survive the next minute. A sewing machine, heavy as regret, a framed ancestor, a ledger with numbers that will never be reconciled. He takes them all gently from people and sets them down so their hands can be free to carry children. The engine coughs hard and goes silent. He does not curse it. He taps the driver on the shoulder and points to the ladders. The driver nods once and runs. Malloy banks to the outbound course and sees for the first time the shape of their work. A dark river cutting a loud country, and beyond it, for miles, the steady glow of a problem that has been solved. He does not rejoice. He does not look away. He files the site where airmen keep such things, next to the feel of a stick in turbulence and the click of a switch that means homeward. In the log, the navigator writes times in a tidy hand. Later, someone on the ground will turn those times into square miles. Someone else will turn square miles into policy. For now, the airplane hums, and the city below plays one unbroken note. On the quay, Sato steadies a ladder and looks at the sky for the first time in an hour. He expects to see airplanes. He sees weather. He calls out his men by name. Some answer. Some are answering elsewhere. He tastes salt and iron and a little sweetness that does not belong to flame. When he closes his eyes, heat colours the lids, and the inside of his head turns the same red as the lane he left. He opens them because there is more to do. The board is clean when the captain arrives with his coffee, and for one careless second he enjoys the look of it, a blank square waiting to be tamed by numbers. Outside, a row of B-29s creaks as they cool, metal settling into new shapes like a barn roof after hail. Malloy's crew follows the familiar line that snakes past the debrief table. Navigator first, pilot next, gunners bringing up the rear, each man carrying his own small weather front of exhaustion. The room smells of pencil shavings, damp canvas, and the faint chemical sweetness that clings to men who have opened bomb bay doors over cities. The captain writes with a practiced hand, sorties 325, bombed 279, missing 14. He underlines the last numbers, not because underlining changes fate, but because a line acknowledges it. They talk in the clipped detail that makes sense to those who have lived in the same sky for the same minutes. Malloy confirms approach altitude, about 6,000 feet at the initial point, dropping slightly on the run to ride the smoothest slice below the worst of the wind. The bombardier notes that the Pathfinder X was visible even without the scope once they were within a few miles, a glowing geometry that turned instructions into a place you could point at. The navigator lays out a neat string of times, doors open, release, doors closed, that match the plan closely enough to be called doctrine. The radio operator reads Pathfinder traffic and post-run fragments. Mark good, fires building fast, minimal fighter contact, turbulence heavy over eastern wards. The tail gunner, who lost his world of side turrets months ago, reports only glare and a few shadows that might have been fighters or tricks of heat. Evelyn Parker steps in with papers kept dry in a folder that will forever smell of damp and pencil. She waits until the last crewman's notes are down, then places the preliminary bomb damage assessment at the edge of the board. The words sit calmly. Roughly 15.8 square miles burned, estimated 90 to 100,000 dead, with the official counts likely to settle nearer the lower figure and then grow as records emerge. About 1 million homeless, structures lost counted in the hundreds of thousands, fire service equipment destroyed beyond replacement within the month. She says the numbers the way she would have said them in Utah, precise, careful, with the humility a good table owes the world it describes. The room does what rooms do when statistics begin to mean faces. It gets a little quieter. A clerk marks E-46 cluster performance as satisfactory, burst altitude near 2,000 feet, bomblet delay functioning as designed. Another clerk writes a note that looks almost like poetry. Interior ignition effective. A discussion of losses follows, and it is remarkably short. About 14 bombers did not return, with the breakdown to be clarified. Some shot down by defence, some by weather that forgot to be friendly when the ships grew light and the air rose with a city's heat. The captain circles the number and draws a straight line to the square miles burned and does not say what the line means. He is a professional and lets arithmetic translate ethics for strategy. Outside, a forklift tugs a pallet into the shade, and a crew chief argues with a spark plug as if it will someday testify against him. Inside, the board acquires its final line for the morning. Results exceptional. Parker watches the chalk write the word she expected and hates, and she thinks of a test house in Utah where she learned how flame learns rooms. She asks a question she already knows the answer to. Were the Pathfinder's M47s needed for acquisition, or would the scope have been enough alone? Because questions make space for breath. Someone says the scope would likely have sufficed, but the X turned doctrine into certainty, and certainty saves minutes. Malloy signs the form that turns the night into paper. He glances at the column reserved for comments and leaves it blank, which is its own kind of truth. The captain erases a smear with the side of his hand and leaves a chalk print that looks like a white wing. Men file toward bunks. The board remains. By noon, someone will start writing a new city on it, as casually as one pins a fresh date to a calendar. The chalk dust hangs a moment in a shaft of sun and then settles on the floor bright as ash. A truck longer than a promise backs to a warehouse and shudders as pallets of E-46 clink into place, metal fruit sliding into wooden crates with the languor of certainty. On Tinian, the road from the pier to the bomb dump is a causeway of logistics, tankers idling, flatbeds stacked with spark plugs in lattice trays, spare R-3350 engines blinking in cosmoline under a sun that would fry a lesser plan. A Seabee on a bulldozer touches 2 fingers to his cap and pushes Coral into a new runway shoulder because traffic needs somewhere to be later this week. In the mess, a corporal throws away half a piece of bread without noticing, and a sergeant retrieves it and eats it because abundance does not always mean waste so much as option. The United States does not merely have more of everything, it has systems for turning more into always. In 1944, American factories produced on the order of 96,000 aircraft, fighter, bomber, trainer, averaging roughly 11 completed machines per hour across the calendar, day and night, Sundays included in the math if not on the line. The B-29 program itself, with costs estimated in the $3 to $3.7 billion 1940s dollars, exceeded the Manhattan Project, a sentence that still feels like hyperbole until you count runways, engines, pressurization, remote turrets removed for payload, thousands of trained aircrew, millions of gallons of high-octane gasoline, and ships to move the whole contraption west one monotonous wave at a time. On a different continent and in a different register, Japan's aircraft output would struggle to reach a third of American totals, and night fighter units count flyable machines on fingers, not clipboards. It is not that the enemy is incompetent. Lieutenant Nakajima can fly rings around a horizon, but that competence cannot mint aluminum. Malloy walks the bomb line and reads stencils as one reads a litany. E-46, 38 each. 40 tins per ship, fuses timed for rooms, not roofs, M47s to draw the X that turns the city into a diagram. A sergeant with a clipboard moves a pencil down a column and finds he is not out of anything important. When he is out of something, a ship will be in harbour before the echo fades. Abundance changes the way courage behaves. It makes it rational to remove turrets, to fly low at night, to bet men's lives on a calculation that says more fire now means fewer crew funerals later. It also changes the temperature of mercy. Crews keep extra chocolate in pockets for children on Saipan who show up to watch takeoffs with brown eyes and quick feet. Pilots write home about movies projected against the side of a Quonset hut while engines breathe a hot sleep nearby. The wealth is not merely metal. It is time, redundancy, second chances. At Nakajima's dispersal, mechanics share a single pair of aviation gloves between two aircraft. Someone counts spark plugs into a tin as if counting days. A fuel bowser arrives already promised elsewhere. He has pride in making do, and more pride in keeping men alive with scraps of advantage. But pride is not a factory. He watches a squadron mate taxi with an instrument he knows is not right and blesses him with luck, the oldest and cheapest tool in war. He thinks of the city behind him, its iron discipline against hunger, its ration books folded like prayers, and understands with a professional's clarity that discipline cannot breathe for a pilot. In a supply tent, Parker reads a report she would not have believed as a child. Within 10 days of Meeting House, similar night raids will likely erase on the order of 31 square miles across 4 major cities, Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, by delivering well over 9,000 tons of incendiaries with losses that command can accept without changing the plan. The phrase accept without changing the plan is both victory and verdict. She signs for a crate of drafting paper and thinks of Utah, where a Japanese village taught her that rooms have behaviours. On the pier, a crane operator swings a net of E-46 off a ship with the patient assurance of a farmer gathering hay. The ship breathes diesel and ambition. A petty officer hands a manifest up the ladder, and a yeoman stamps it without looking up because the column that reads "Received" will get a checkmark again tomorrow. An impossible statistic lodges itself where a man keeps his faith. At the peak of one American plant's rhythm, a heavy bomber of a different type could roll out roughly every hour, a pulse you could set a clock by, while elsewhere an entire air force struggles to find one machine that both flies and fights on the same morning. Abundance is not a boast, it is a schedule. By morning, the Sumida looks tired, a working river that has done a night shift hauling heat and now pretends it is only water again. Sato squats on the quay with a pencil stump and a notebook that absorbed more ash than ink. He writes names until the letters blur into strokes, then writes locations when names do not present themselves. Woman with child near Canal Gate, old man with 2 buckets near Shrine, family of 5 by the market's iron post. He does not guess at numbers because guessing would be a kind of disrespect. He records what he can see and leaves blank space where a clerk with better paper might one day write the rest. He hears a voice and looks up to see a police sergeant with a ledger whose spine has broken. The sergeant reads totals in a hoarse whisper, as if volume could change them. Sato does not correct him. There are no correct numbers yet, only numbers that will one day be called official and then be amended by grief. Far away, in rooms that still have glass in their windows, someone will settle on an initial figure for the dead, on the order of 87,1793, with injuries listed at 40,918, and the homeless counted in a number that feels like a city by itself, perhaps 1,000,000. Other tallies will drift higher and come to rest somewhere near 100,000 lives burned out of the ledger in one night. About 15.8 square miles of the capital will be declared destroyed, a phrase whose calm betrays the smell of it. Roughly 267,000 structures will be gone, which is a statistic until you stand where a block used to be and look for a corner and find none. Malloy sits on a step under the wing and drinks coffee that tastes like victory and sleep. He does not look toward the horizon where the glow still haunts. He looks at the crew chief's hands and watches them move across metal, already counting what must be done to make the next mission the same. He knows the board inside says missing 1-4, and he has written a letter that fits in a single envelope and does none of the work it pretends to do. The navigator is already smoothing a new map. The tail gunner is filing a burr off a belt link because the difference between smooth and rough can be a life in the next sky. Evelyn Parker reviews the morning's collated reports and adds 2 cold sentences that are not new information so much as new emphasis. Interior ignition worked as intended, driving flame into rooms rather than across roofs. Pathfinder marking with M47's significantly improved aiming performance in haze, though radar would likely have sufficed. She pauses over the word sufficed because it is not a kindness but a calibration. She knows the debate will continue in corridors that smell of chalk. Lieutenant Nakajima walks past a line of machines that resemble sleep. He touches a cowling with his knuckles because a palm would burn, even now, from last night's heat. He stays a moment longer than duty asks, then carries his own ledger to an office that pretends it is still an office. He writes what he saw and what he could not do, and what he will try next time if fuel and weather permit the trying. He writes with respect for enemies he could not see clearly enough to hate. He closes the book carefully. Sato turns another page and begins a new list. He adds a second column, narrower: engines destroyed, hydrants gone dry, hoses burned through, men unaccounted for by name and by nickname, because nicknames sometimes walk home when names do not. He will not count his own losses aloud until evening. He looks up at the river and decides. The city will practice again. The city will learn a new drill for a new kind of night. He sets his pencil in the fold and stands. The numbers will go to maps soon, then to memoranda, then to decisions. They will be debated in careful tones and filed in cabinets that do not catch fire. They will also sit in a notebook that smells of smoke and river mud and sweat. Both sets of numbers will be true in their own ways. Neither will be enough. The pins go into the wall map the way a metronome ticks. Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and the room nods as if the wall has spoken sense. What worked over Tokyo will likely work there too. The geometry does not change when the street names do. A duty officer taps the heads of the pins with the blunt end of a pencil and writes dates beside them, leaving space for a column called Results he is grimly confident will fill itself. Malloy's crew attends a briefing that feels less like invention and more like procedure. Night, low, incendiary, radar to the IP, pathfinders draw the X, bomb inside it. Streams timed in minutes, not hopes. Someone in the back asks a question about flak belts repositioned for low approach, and a colonel answers with a calculus of acceptable losses that would be obscene if it were not precise. The room understands. Precision is the only courtesy war extends to people who must continue. The convergence becomes obvious even to those who do not live in maps. Incendiary nights will leach heat and will from machine shops hidden in neighbourhoods. A naval blockade will lean on the nation's sternum until breath goes shallow. Later, shocks of a different physics will strike a country already paper-thin from fire. None of this argues a lack of courage in defence. It argues that courage has limits not shared by petroleum and aluminum when democracy decides to pour both through a single nozzle pointed west. Parker reads production indices and sees lines bend like reeds in strong water. Output dips where men and women used to make gear teeth at kitchen tables. Trains that would carry parts carry refugees. Civil defence pulls hands away from factories and towards cisterns, and the day after a raid belongs to brooms and to silence. Lieutenant Nakajima studies a memo that admits what pilots already know. Night fighter strength remains insufficient. Radar handoffs cannot be guaranteed at low level. Searchlights will be reserved to protect critical points, which is a diplomatic way to say most places will have to fend for themselves. He flips the page and finds a recommendation for dispersal of aircraft among groves and sheds, the same old song sung now at a lower pitch. He does not argue with paper. He finishes his tea and walks the line to see which machines slept and which only pretended. In a bomb dump stacked like a true believer's pantry, a corporal reads fresh stencils and chalk states on the backs of canisters because an orderly stock makes orderly nights. He does not consider himself a hero. He considers himself a man who can carry a number from one column to another without dropping it. The miracle is that there are enough men like him to make miracles mundane. Malloy runs his hand along a bomb bay catwalk and tells his bombardier to recheck the delay settings because humidity can be a saboteur. The bombardier nods and hums a tune from a stateside dance hall that used to smell like beer and perfume and will again. Sato returns to a ward office that has been moved to an undamaged schoolroom and begins teaching a new choreography. Evacuation before suppression when the wind rises beyond a known threshold. Canals as corridors and not merely destinations. Whistle codes adjusted to reflect a city that can learn to run before it tries to fight. He does not call this defeat. He calls it the discipline of survivors. He writes drills on a chalkboard whose surface still holds the faint ghost of multiplication tables. Children will come back to this room someday. He writes as if they already have. The pins on the map take on the stillness of fate, but fate is merely a name men give to schedules they do not wish to read aloud. In 10 days, the column labelled Results for 4 cities will show about 31 square miles burned by more than 9,000 tons of delivered ordnance, with aircraft losses that make planners nod and continue. It is an arithmetic proposition with blood in the margins. It is also the way wars end, when one side can convert votes into aluminum faster than the other can convert slogans into airplanes. Malloy checks the weather, kisses his hand to the ship like a ball player in a moment of private superstition, and climbs the ladder. He does not believe in inevitability. He believes in fuel, timing, and the discipline of hands that do not shake. The ship starts, the pins wait, the calendar acquires a new page. When the ledger is finally written for people who prefer ledgers to fires, it will say that on the night of 9th to 10th March 1945, roughly 1,165 tons of incendiaries erased about 15.8 square miles of Tokyo, killed on the order of 90 to 100,000 people, with an official figure near 87,793 and injuries around 40,918, and left perhaps 1 million homeless. It will add that approximately 14 B-29s did not return, and that the balance between metal expended and city destroyed persuaded commanders to make this night not an outlier, but a template. The numbers sit there with the serenity of arithmetic. They do not show Sato's hands after he lifted a ladder 100 times. They do not reveal the taste Malloy carried on his tongue when the doors opened. They do not sound like the cough of a pump that chooses a bad moment to die. Parker keeps both kinds of records, columns and smells, and understands that history needs both to stand without wobbling. The ledger will also say something that still feels like a magician's trick explained. American industry in 1944 produced roughly 96,000 aircraft of all types, about 11 per hour when averaged across the year, while funding and fielding a B-29 program whose cost exceeded the Manhattan projects. A free people voted budgets, argued details, built runways on Coral one truckload at a time, trained crews in towns that used to grow wheat and still did, and then sailed the whole construction across a Pacific so large it was once considered a moat. This is not triumphalism. It is logistics. It is the democratic habit of solving problems in committee until the committee's decisions become steel and gasoline that can fly. Lieutenant Nakajima stands with a hand on a cowling that has cooled at last and thinks about the line he will tell himself if he is allowed an old age, that he fought as well as a man can fight when the sky itself has been purchased by someone else. He will not excuse himself. He will take a long time to forgive his leaders for promising miracles in a currency they did not possess. He will remember a sunless noon when a city made weather from its own houses and sent it upward to meet him with a heat no textbook mentioned. He will honour enemies he never clearly saw. Sato returns to a lane that has been swept. He squats where a doorway used to be and listens for sounds he knows, the squeak of a cart, the slap of a fishmonger's knife, and hears none yet. He opens his notebook to a page with more blank than ink and writes 3 new lines. Rebuild cisterns deeper, teach children to run by touch, store ladders by the canal. He does not write win or lose. He writes continue. Malloy reads a stateside headline in a mimeographed paper that calls the raid decisive. He recognizes the truth inside the simplification. He also recognizes what will be asked of him. Tomorrow looks a lot like what was asked yesterday. Start, fly, bomb inside the X, come home, sign a form, sleep, start again. He writes to his wife about the smell of the ocean at night and does not mention the other smell. He has decided that victory tastes like coffee and dusted chocolate and the knowledge that his crew listened when he said steady hands. Parker files a summary that will sit on a shelf where graduate students will someday read it under fluorescent light. She includes a line a supervisor will cross out for being editorial. That capability and responsibility are twins, and a great arsenal is only as honourable as the aims it serves. She knows the line will still be true even if it does not survive the draft. She keeps a copy in her notebook, which smells faintly of the Utah range. The impossible statistic returns for its curtain call, not to boast, but to instruct. Averaged across a single year, American factories made airplanes at a rate that would deliver one every handful of minutes, even while ships and guns and trucks and rations, chocolate included, flowed on separate, equally relentless schedules. Totalitarianism could command men to charge. It could not command aluminum to arrive faster than bauxite permitted. The Free World's committees beat the tyrant's orders because they could replace a broken part without breaking the man who held it. At dusk, the Sumida runs like any other river. Ash has long since settled into its mud. On an airfield half an ocean away, a wing shadow slides along poured concrete that will outlast the war. Between river and runway stands the arithmetic that ended an empire, a democracy's decision to turn its factories into a weather machine and then to fly that weather where it must go. The ledger closes, the chapter ends, and the world that follows, our world, opens like a door into morning.